most professional scholars and the general public interested in history. It was linked to a widely held belief that the ancient pre-Christian religions of Europe, generally known by the umbrella term of paganism, had in some form and by some definition survived beyond the introduction of Christianity as the official faith. Moreover, it was as commonly believed that they did so for some considerable time, extending through the Middle Ages and far into the early modern period. This was thought to be true to some extent to the entire continent, but considerations of space and expertise mean that it will be examined in depth now, with respect to Britain and publications in the English language. The belief concerned was often asserted in general terms. In 1892, a leader of the newly formed British Folklore Society informed his colleagues that English commoners had barely been Christianized, even as late as the 17th century, and as such had preserved a pagan culture barely recognizable to the social elite. 30 years later, a leading expert on institutions of the medieval English Church, in a few lines that he devoted to the beliefs of ordinary villagers, declared confidently that they had been cheerful semi-pagans. He continued more lyrically to assert that the old idols remained under the old Christian veneer, and that in church the women crowded around Mary, yet they paid homage to the old deities by their nightly fireside, or at the time, honoured haunts, grove or stone or spring. In 1952, an American historian of art, discussing medieval folk belief, suggested that paganism had not merely persisted into the Middle Ages, but gained renewed strength at times. He spoke of a new thrust of pagan forces instilling virulence into customs, which otherwise would have been slowly neutralized, though he added that the history of the second pagan movement, which must have been neutralized in Western Europe by the 20th century, is known only fragmentarily, and opinions of it amongst scholars vary widely. All of these were highly respected authorities, although none of them knew much about medieval popular religion. They could make these statements with such confidence because they were based on a mass of apparent evidence of different kinds, which had been interpreted in ways which tended towards the general conclusion just cited. One striking example of this in the British context was the Cerne Abbas giant, the outline of a man 180 feet tall, carved from the chalk rock on a hillside in Dorset, brandishing a 120-foot club. Two aspects of the figure are especially meaningful in this context. One is the virility, for he has pronounced genitals, including a 30-foot erect phallus. The other is that the valley below him had been occupied by one of England's most important and long-lived medieval abbeys, which seemed to present the inescapable conclusion that if the giant were ancient, as his primeval appearance would seem to suggest, then the Christian monks had at least connived in his preservation for 6 centuries. A very popular and erudite guide to the ancient monuments of England and Wales, published in the 1950s, summed up the prevalent opinion concerning the figure. It stated that the giant was probably Romano-British, and that it must have been kept in being by the common people, overruling not only the parish priests, but also the monks, their neighbours, in frank assertion of a symbol of unabashed paganism. Famous legends, as well as famous monuments, could inspire similar suggestions. Another of the early luminaries of the Folklore Society opined that the story of Lady Godiva's nude ride through the city of Coventry to save her people from heavy taxation actually testified to the late survival of pagan belief and worship in the city. He believed that the latter had been centred on the cult of a horse-riding goddess. British folklorists, however, found much more luxuriant evidence for a persisting paganism in the